today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about how to take the reins in your relationship. You can't control the direction of your relationship. Your emotion will. When we have our emotions, instead of being dominated by them, we can learn from them. When we have our emotions instead of being dominated by them, they can actually guide us. When we have our emotions instead of being dominated by them, we can keep our eyes on the prize, which is a healthy relationship. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm your host, and today we're talking about taking control of your relationship's direction. And how do you do that? Now, it sounds like a super sexy topic, how to take control of your relationship's direction. And I'm going to share the unpopular part with you. The full title of this episode is Owning Your Emotions, Taking Control of Your Relationship's Direction. Because what we know is we can't control the other person. If we could, the relationship would be fixed already. Right? And truthfully, if we could control them, they wouldn't really be the person we want them to be. I mean, if you've ever seen the Stepford Wives, there's a couple of different versions of them, but in both versions, basically what happens is these guys reshape their wives into who they think they want them to be. And what they get are these automatons. Well, at least in the first version, I haven't seen the second version. What they get are these automatons who have no free will and don't drive them to change or grow. And really, what we get into relationships for is to change and grow. What we get into relationships for is to have a partner on our side who not only loves us, who not only cares for us, who not only has a shared vision for our lives as individuals and as a couple, but who supports us and holds us accountable and calls us on our BS. So if you could control them, it wouldn't work. So what can you control? Well, it's interesting. I was batting this topic around with chat, right? I sometimes run the topics up the flagpole with chat to get its take on it. And it talked about controlling your emotions. But the truth is you can't even control your emotions. What we're actually talking about is managing your own emotional state. So let me ask you a question. Do your emotions sometimes feel like they're in control rather than you having them? You know what I mean by that? Are you sometimes having an emotion so powerful that it's taking you somewhere and you don't know where it is? Maybe you've been so angry and a part of you saying is, don't say that. No, don't do that. But you're so wrapped up in the emotion, you can't help yourself. That's what we're talking about here. If that's going on, you can't control the direction of your relationship. Your emotion will. And that kind of emotion, we label it negative emotion. It's going to take you to a what? Negative place. And so we need to learn how to make peace with our emotions, to have them without them having us. That's what this episode is all about. When we have our emotions, instead of being dominated by them, we can learn from them. When we have our emotions instead of being dominated by them, they can actually guide us. When we have our emotions instead of being dominated by them, we can keep our eyes on the prize, which is a healthy relationship. And exceptions to that might be, you might have a partner who's totally toxic, in which case, if you have your eyes on the prize and you're managing yourself, you won't be manipulated by them and you'll step out of that relationship into one that's healthy. So owning your emotions, what does that mean? It means that you're not suppressing them, right? There are a lot of models for emotional management that are if an uncomfortable emotion comes up, put it down and look at it later. You're not suppressing them, but you're accepting them. You're accepting them, but you're not being taken over by them. So you're in a situation with your partner and you're experiencing anger. And the anger tells you there's something about that situation that needs to change. But instead of saying, biatch, you need to change, which is what the emotion is driving, instead, you're going to say, you know what? I'm feeling some anger right now. And I need to take a look at it. I need to understand what it's about. I need to see where it's taking me. Maybe you're going to take a time out and have some time with that anger, or maybe you're going to use an I statement. We've talked about I statements a lot. But when you have that kind of emotional management where there's enough of your cerebral cortex, your prefrontal cortex present to tell the amygdala, which is driving the emotion, to chill out. When you have that going on, studies show that you're going to have greater relationship satisfaction and fewer destructive conflicts. I want to say that again. When we have enough rational, conscious mind left to notice the emotion, but not be dominated by it, to be able to express it or take a time out or whatever we need to do to process that emotion, the studies show that couples who have that going on experience greater relationship satisfaction. And greater relationship satisfaction means moving together in a happier, more fulfilling way. So I want to ask you, are there specific actions or words that your partner uses that instantly set you off? Probably there are, right? The chances are when you're in a relationship for a while or married for a while, you have an unconscious awareness of each other's buttons and triggers. And when one feels fearful, they will unconsciously reach for that button or trigger. So no doubt you've had this experience. A trigger or a button is a collection of old emotions that, when tapped, cause us to have a reaction much greater than the situation calls for. What I like to tell my clients is, or really what I like to ask my clients is, are you having a reaction that's 0 to 10? Like you're going from 0 to 10 miles an hour emotionally, meaning there was no driving in that direction at all. But then when the anger came up, you go to 10 miles an hour. Or are you a freaking EV that goes from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds? If you're going from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, the chances are that there's stored, unresolved emotion that's driving that, right? It takes a lot of energy to go from 0 to 60. And when we go from 0 to 60, there's not much prefrontal cortex or cerebral cortex present. We're going 60. It's about adrenaline. It's about movement. It's a chemical reaction. So a trigger is an old assumption or group of emotions that have not been resolved from the past. And something that your partner says or does reminds you of that. And your unconscious mind goes, ruh-roh, there it is again. We need to go. And a whole bunch of emotion comes up at once. Now, in keeping with this series, your prefrontal cortex, your cerebral cortex, its ability to intervene is going to be limited or enhanced by where your attention has been through the course of the day. If you have been spending a lot of time on social media, or if you have been in a lot of driving in heavy traffic, if you're fatigued, emotionally fatigued in any way, if you've been spending a lot of time movies that bring up aggression or sex or any kinds of intense feeling, if you've been playing games that bring that stuff up, your prefrontal cortex is going to have less energy available to it than if you've been preserving it, if you've been practicing mindfulness or meditation, if you've been journaling, if you've been taking time to charge your battery, however you do that. If you're an extrovert, you might take your time creating a podcast, right? That might charge your battery. You might take your time meeting people. That might charge your battery. And so a lot of what this series is about is, what is the choice that we're making when it comes to our emotions? Are we engaging in practices that give us the emotional bank so that when we're feeling triggered, we can manage it? Or are we engaging in a lifestyle that's running down our emotional bank where we're fatigued? And so when we're triggered, we have no management of it whatsoever. That's what I'm saying to you in this episode is, when you have awareness of these triggers and you've got emotional energy in the bank, your cerebral cortex or prefrontal cortex will be able to manage your reaction better. When you don't have money in the bank, all bets are off. A lot of what this series is about is I'm encouraging you to get very conscious about where you put your attention. Where you put your attention is going to develop certain parts of your brain, and where you put your attention is going to determine how much emotional energy you have available to you when you're triggered or challenged in any way. Are you feeling like certain conflicts are always repeating? That is a big sign of underlying unresolved triggers. And the chances are you and your partner, if you're having what we call the fight at Rich in Relationship, that fight where you feel like you have to win and they've got to lose, or they feel like they've got to win and you've got to lose, that fight where you don't feel heard or you don't feel understood, that fight where it seems like you're at opposite poles and can't seem to resolve anything, the chances are you're both in a highly triggered state if you're engaging in that fight. So notice when you're feeling heightened emotions and take note of what are the themes, because identifying these patterns is the first step in managing them. But honestly, the first step in managing them really is building up those emotional reserves. And that's a shift from reaction to being reflective. Or really, what we like to say here is we want you to be proactive so you're not reactive. Before we get into that too deeply, first let's talk about the blame trap versus self-reflection. If you're stuck in a cycle of blaming your partner for your emotional state, the chances are there's not a lot of self-reflection going on, because blame is a defense mechanism. It's something we engage in to deflect anything that sounds like criticism, anything that sounds hurtful, anything that sounds threatening. We'll go to blame. When we're in the state of blame, in its most extreme form, we can never be wrong and they can never be right. Blame is, I'm going to win, you're going to lose. If you find yourself in a state of blame, the chances are you're going to have a hard time talking yourself off of that ledge. But just listening to this podcast, you're going to have some awareness of that now. And you may be able to say, honey, I am in a state of blame. I need to take a time out and reset. If you're in a state of blame, you're probably not going to, your cerebral cortex is probably not going to take control of it in that moment. I tell this story about falling into a pit. Regaining control of the centers of our brain that manage using these things is like exercising a muscle. Let me tell the pit story, and then we'll explain what that has to do with the muscle. I've told this story a couple of times on this podcast. If you've heard it before, please forgive me, but you're walking down the street, maybe you're looking at your phone, and boom, you fall into a hole. And you look around and go, whoa, I'm in this hole. And you climb out of it and you dust yourself up and brush yourself off. And you go, man, I never want to fall in that hole again. And you go down the street and you go down in your business. The next day you come down the street and you're looking at your phone, but your unconscious mind goes, whoa, 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 look out, there's a hole out there. And you stop and you're right on the edge of the hole. Right? This is kind of what I'm talking about in terms of when you're really triggered, when you're in blame. When you're in blame, it's like falling in the hole. I've fallen in the hole. Once you have the awareness that there's this hole called blame that you've been falling in, now you're at the next stage, which is, I see it. I see the hole. I'm about to fall into it. I might even be, like my feet might be, one foot might be hanging over that edge, but I can catch myself and step back. And before you can go on in the conversation, just like that hole, you're going to need to tiptoe around that hole. You say, wait a minute, I just got to reset. You tiptoe around the hole, and then you go down the street and continue your journey. Hopefully, this is like exercising a muscle. Right? The first time you lift a really heavy weight, it feels so awful. The next time, not so bad. The third time, a little easier. So let's go back to the hole. The third day, you're walking down the hole, and you think, I really shouldn't look at my phone when I'm walking down the street, and you see the hole down there and you go to the other side of the street. And so the blame is coming up for you. You see it coming up for you, but you think, I'm not going to engage in blame. I'm going to go to the other side of the street. Like exercising a muscle. At this point, your muscle's gotten strong enough so that you can resist the blame, your mental muscle, your prefrontal cortex, right? And what you need to get is when we live in the world of blame and anger, our amygdala gets bigger. Because that's where our attention is, and not just or bigger might not be the right word. What we do is when we're using our amygdala, there's more blood flow and neural development happening in that part of our brain. And when our attention is on being rational and reasonable, and we decide we don't want to go into that hole, we don't want our amygdala to take over, we are developing blood flow and neural development in our cerebral cortex. From the studies of the brain show that our brain is really kind of like jello. And how much, how big each part of the brain is, or how much development each part of the brain has, really depends on where our attention is. And so the point of this particular episode is, I want you to be really conscious of where your attention is. I don't need you to be taking their inventory. I need you to be taking your inventory. If you want to be in control of the direction of your relationship, if you want to eventually walk down a completely different street where there is no hole, where blame doesn't even come up. It's not even on that street. If you want to be that strong, you need to pay attention and exercise the parts of your brain that are rational and reasonable and strong without stuffing your emotions. You want to be aware of the emotions. If you're not aware of the emotions and noticing where they come from, you're going to keep walking down the other side of the street where blame is, instead of going down a new street where there's no blame at all. Are you getting what I'm saying to you? Are you hearing what I'm laying down here? Do you want to gain more insight into why you feel that way? The next time you're upset, take a moment and ask yourself, what's driving this emotion? What's the lesson this emotion has for me? And sometimes the lesson is going to sound like, don't ever trust yourself around them. That's not a positive lesson. We want a positive lesson. A positive lesson might look like, if you're feeling blaming and upset, a positive lesson might be, wow, they're right. I really wasn't my best self in that moment. How could I be my best self under those circumstances in the future? Not that they were their best self, but it doesn't really matter, right? So part of this game is, when we are cleaning up our side of the street, when we are owning our own emotions and not worrying about theirs, right? The reason why we control the direction of the relationship is we decide what street we're going to go down in this relationship. And if the relationship won't go down that street, maybe we're going to walk out of the relationship. Or maybe we're going to step out of the relationship and see if they'll follow us down that other street. But we've got to choose that. It won't happen by us going down the same street and falling into the same hole over and over and over. Are you feeling this? Are you ready to start working with your emotions instead of fighting them? Awareness is the first step in emotional management. We need to be aware of the emotion as they come up. When we land in blame, we are not consciously aware of that emotion. One of the tricks to being aware of it is to label the emotion. Oh my God, that's blame. That's self-righteous anger. There's no place for that in this relationship. Not that I'm not right, not that I'm not angry, but that self-righteous anger that shows up as I'm right and you're wrong, no place for it if I want to have a partnership, because if my partner loses, they're my partner. It's like shooting myself in the foot, right? Or it's more like this. I'm running a three-legged race with my partner and I shoot them in the foot because I'm mad at them. And now we're losing the race because they can't walk. That's how you want to think about this. So awareness, labeling the emotions. When you label the emotions, in order to label the emotion, your conscious mind has to be engaged. In order to use an I statement, which is up on the Rich in Relationship website, it isn't up as I say this, and I've been saying it's up for a while, so we got to get it up there. I'm going to talk to my people about that, but it will be up on the Rich in Relationship website. In order to use an I statement, you have to be able to label what the emotion is. I statement is, I'm feeling angry when you decide that we're going to go to a restaurant on the other side of town, and I'm exhausted because it reminds me of when I was a kid and everybody made decisions for me and never asked me how I felt. In order to say I feel angry, we have to label the emotion. And labeling the emotion and connecting it to a situation helps us to see what the trigger is. And then asking, all right, what does that trigger remind me of in my past? Allows us to explore, all right, where might that be coming from in me? It also allows our partner to have empathy for us. It's a moment of vulnerability. It's a moment of risk. They might say, I don't give a crap what happened in your childhood. We're going to that restaurant. In which case, you know that it might be time for a timeout, because if they're that triggered, if you've made yourself vulnerable and they've stepped on your emotion, it's probably time to step out and take a breather. Tools that will help you to be able to use I statements is mindfulness, meditation, and prayer. We talk about it all the time on Rich in Relationship. The studies of Buddhists show that when they meditate, their cerebral cortex is lit up and their amygdala is not. And further studies show that when our attention is in our cerebral cortex, it's developing. And so mindfulness, meditation, and prayer develops our cerebral cortex. It helps us to stay in that rational place. The beauty of prayer is that it also lights up our speech center, as opposed to mindfulness and meditation. Warning, sometimes people use mindfulness and meditation to repress emotions. Oh my God, I have this intense emotion. I'm just going to focus on my breathing. Nothing else matters. Oh, I have this emotion. I'm just going to dismiss it. That can be a great practice. But when we dismiss the emotion without identifying it, looking at the situation and looking at its roots, then what we're doing is repressing it. And so, like any tool, mindfulness, meditation, and prayer can be a weapon against ourselves, or it can be a tool to help ourselves. But I strongly suggest doing that 4 to 6 times a day, and your cerebral cortex will develop and your amygdala will become less developed. You can choose how you're going to be responding. If you have enough cerebral cortex present to recognize that you're triggered, you're on the edge of that hole about to fall in, you can choose what you're going to say. You can either jump in the hole and blame, or you could use an I statement, or you could say, I need to take a time out so that I can talk about this more rationally. I'm triggered right now. Nothing that comes out of my mouth is going to be helpful to you. And I want you to know that I've said that. It sounds really pithy and easy. I have said this in my own marriage, and my wife has not been interested in me taking a time out. And I've had to say to her, listen, it's not that I'm stonewalling you, honey. I'm in a really bad space. Could we please just take 15 minutes and come back to this? Right? And if she, in the instance of my example, can't wait 15 minutes, it's going to be, all right, then you're just going to have to be upset because I love you too much to interact with you this way. And I'm just too triggered. And then you go take a walk. Because usually when the other person's responding that way, no, you can't take a timeout. We haven't fixed this yet. Usually they're mad triggered also, and you're doing them a favor by walking away, as long as you come back to it. If you don't come back to it, then you are stonewalling them. Then that is not managing your emotions. That's avoiding them. Have you ever noticed how a single post or notification can change your mood? Social media apps are designed to stimulate dopamine, which can take us into a cycle of seeking validation or reacting emotionally. Research shows that social media triggers dopamine in the brain. In fact, they design it that way. It's highly addictive. And so I want you to be really careful about saying, honey, I need to take a time out, and then going to social media for a hit of dopamine, because that's also a way of avoiding your emotions, emoting your avoidance, avoiding your emotions. Don't do that. I am seriously considering taking all social media off my phone and only looking at it on a laptop for just this reason. If you want more control over your emotional state, limiting screen time, social media exposure, it's huge. Consider only tapping social media at certain times a day, and especially not when you're triggered. Managing your emotions will steer your relationship's direction, because if you're not emotionally intense, then the relationship can't be emotionally intense. Or if you're emotionally intense in a way that you intend to be, because you want to be loving and caring and showing up, then the relationship will be that way. Whatever emotion you're expressing, you want to make sure that your conscious mind is in the driver's seat. I'm thinking there might be one exception. I'm thinking if you're making love, you may not want your conscious mind in the driver's seat, but you want your conscious mind to be aware and able to step in and notice. Right? You don't want to be completely unconscious in any interaction with your partner. The trick is that when you respond calmly, it encourages your partner to do the same. The trick is when you shift the conversation towards solutions rather than conflict, then the conversation is going to move towards solution. If you're looking to build a relationship where communication is easy and differences, let's call them, are resolved, managing emotions is the key When you show that you can manage your emotions, you're showing that you can be trusted. When you show that you're managing your emotions, you're showing that it's safe to share emotions. When you show that you're managing your emotions, you are building connection. The more you practice being in touch with your emotions, finding out what the lesson is they want you to learn, and going to the place that's going to build the relationship stronger, the stronger the relationship is going to get, and the stronger you're going to get. And it may be in the beginning that you're doing all the work. It may be in the beginning you're taking the lead. It may be in the beginning that you're going out and getting extra help with this, because let's face it, when we've been managed by our emotions most of our lives, and most of us have been, learning to step back into the driver's seat consciously takes time and extra help. When you go to the gym for the first time, let's say you start lifting weights, a personal trainer might come along and say, hey, you know, the way you're doing that, that might hurt you in some ways more than it'll help you. Let me show you a way that will help you more, right? Sometimes it's helpful to have someone who's been there, who's practiced what you're practicing, and who understands where you're going. So for today, I want you to identify one emotion that frequently appears during conflict and practice managing it through awareness and maybe some mindful breathing exercise like box breathing. Breathe in, breathe out. Just see how that works for you. And I want to hear from you about it. Like, reach out to me, contact me, go to richinrelationship.com. We've got tools there. You can contact me through the website, and stay tuned, because the next episode is going to be all about breaking free, how to let go of past hurts. Really, it's about it's about letting go of those old hurts that are causing you to be triggered, right? This episode is all about get a grip on your conscious mind so that you can avoid those triggers. The next episode is going to be more about how to dissolve the triggers. So stay tuned and have a wonderful tomorrow.